Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Total Compensation Staying Competitive in Today's Labor Market. This program is part of the SHRM webcast series. You can learn about upcoming and on demand events from our e newsletters and the webcast homepage at shrm.org/webcast. SHRM thanks ADP for sponsoring this program and our series free webcast for the HR community. Before you hear from today's speakers, I'm going to provide with some guidance on using the SHRM webcast interface. In the center of the screen, you see the title slide for today's presentation. You can move that screen by clicking and dragging it. You can also change the size of the display by dragging that window from the right. Or there's a large square sizer in the upper right of the window. You can click for full screen viewing. Under the SHRM logo, you see the video window. There you'll see our presenters who you will hear from shortly. You can move and resize the video window the same way you can the slide screen. Beneath the speaker's window is the program resources area. We encourage you to ask questions throughout this webcast. Under the resources window, you'll find the Q&A widget. You can use that to get your questions to the speaker or to our webcast tech support team if you're having any issues viewing the program. We will hold questions till the end of the presentation, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. On the bottom of your screen, there's a tray of buttons that control all the windows in the webcast player. The blue icon on the left of the tray brings up a certificate you can download towards the end of the program. It includes the SHRM certification, the certification credit number. Viewing this full program qualifies for 1 PDC towards SHRM CP and SHRM SCP recertification. You can claim the program for the kinds of HR recertification credit, but you need to provide the details to your certifying body. We only have pre-approval for SHRM certification. Now about today's program, Total Compensation, Staying Competitive in Today's Labor Market. I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to our speakers.
All right. Thank you, and hello to our audience joining today, and welcome to this ADP and SHRM webinar. We are really excited to have a conversation around total compensation and staying competitive in today's labor market. We have a lot of good information to share and a lot of great data. You can't have a conversation about total compensation without data, so definitely looking forward to sharing insights and discuss how companies have an opportunity to really elevate their compensation game. But before we get into details, let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. I will kick us off. I'm Kieran Contractor, and I am the Director of Talent Acquisition for our HRO HCM services at ADP. I've been with ADP for 17 years, all in talent. Talent is truly a passion of mine. So I lead a team of recruiting specialists that are really assisting our ADP clients every day with various positions in a variety of industries. And having conversations with companies around candidate engagement and being competitive are conversations that we're having daily. So really looking forward to bringing in some recruitment insight to the conversation. I will hand it off to Suzanne.
Thanks, Kieran. Hi, everybody. My name is Suzanne Rogers. I'm the Vice President of Benefits and Compliance for ADP Total Source. That's ADP's PEO division. In this role, I have responsibility for shaping and creating the best-in-class benefits programs for our clients and their employees. In this role, I'm excited to dig into new to the market benefit products, as well as your tried and true benefit products, and excited to share with you today just how you might be able to leverage new products in your overall total compensation package. Greg, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Greg Usberti. I'm the Vice President of Strategy here at ADP, and I've been with ADP in the Human Resource Outsourcing division, that is our PEO product, as well as our ASO Managed Comprehensive Services product, for 12 years. Operationally, I handle everything from messaging to sales strategy, working and coordinating with marketing and learning. And then functionally, I actually run a team of what we call deal strategists. These analyze client and prospect data in a sales process to make recommendations around strategy when it comes to HR from a process and tool perspective, ultimately to drive a better experience for employees and drive business outcomes. Thanks again for having me.
Perfect. Thank you, Suzanne and Greg. I love it. We have a benefits and strategy powerhouse, so definitely looking forward to this conversation. So I think we can all agree that in the last few years, there's been quite the whirlwind, right? When we think about the labor market and all the trends that we've seen, we truly are in this ever-changing labor market today, and what I like to call the non-traditional era of talent as well. And when we think about just the concerns that we've seen and the trends that have been impacting, there's a lot of challenges and concerns around potential recession in 2024, Are we in it? Did we pass it? Are we going to see it? These are all the questions that everyone is asking every single day. And there's definitely a lot more challenges around adapting to economic and social pressures, especially with the impact of inflation. Wellness is more important to the workforce now more than ever, especially given the topic around mental health, and it's been on top of mind since COVID. We're seeing the generational shift really impact the market as a record number of baby boomers have exited the workforce, and they'll continue to do so. But now companies need to really adapt to the newer generations, right? Like Gen Z, and understanding how they think about work and how it's different and how the needs of the generations can vary. And then last but not least, the trend around attracting and retaining talent is one of the biggest priorities for companies today. Although we may be seeing the market cool down a bit and quit rates have actually returned to pre-COVID levels, we can't forget that the current market is still very different than the market that we knew. So looking at factors like pay and benefits and flexibility and career mobility, they're all on top of mind for the workforce. And because of this, companies really have to continue to evaluate what they offer and how they can continue to keep their workforce engaged by really connecting to their people. So to start off, we're going to kick it off with a poll question. We'd love to hear from our audience. Please take a look at this question and see what really relates to you. What is the biggest challenge that you face today when trying to attract and retain talent? So with our options, right, we have competing with salary. That's something that we hear pretty often, especially as we're speaking to organizations today and they're struggling with the demands of salary. Lack of benefits, that's continuously on top of mind for candidates today and current employees. No remote, hybrid work. I know we speak to candidates. My team speaks to candidates every single day where they're always asking for that flexibility and what is it that companies really bring to the table. And then no career growth opportunities, making sure that having the opportunity to really build on skills and continue to grow is something that we're definitely seeing. So I'm gonna go ahead and see what our audience has said here. All right, well, competing with salary seems to be the winner. Competing with salary, we have remote, no remote, hybrid work, so that flexibility is definitely in there. Lack of benefits seems to be the last, but no career growth opportunities is definitely coming in third. So this is interesting, right? Competing with salary is the number one. The lack of benefits is actually at the bottom. But when we talk about competing with salary, and not being able to actually compensate for that gap, that's where benefits can really come in, and looking at the perks and being able to incorporate that into a total compensation package is actually key. So interesting stats there, absolutely. Looking at going into the salary conversation, actually, this is probably the best slide to take a look at when we look at keeping up with salary trends. And we can't talk about total compensation without really talking about what we've seen in the market when it comes to salary. And when we take a look at things like pay transparency and pay equity, it really played a big role in what we've seen in the last maybe 2 years. And I think the conversation around pay transparency is going to continue. But, when we take a look at gender pay gap, as well as just pay gaps in general. This is something coming from the ADP Research Institute. Approximately 76% of the workers would consider looking for a new job if they discovered an unfair gender pay gap at their organization. And on an average, 1 of 3 workers surveyed as part of a recent ADP Research Institute survey, they report that they believe that their pay is unfair. We also know that because of the demands, both low wage and high wage workers have actually seen pay gains consistently for the last 3 years. And I know many of our audience members today that are hiring managers will definitely agree that it has been very tough to keep up with the pay. We have, people that have been looking for wage growth. You have new candidates that are looking for anywhere from 15 to 20% of an increase on their salary. So it's definitely been really tough to actually meet the salary demands. And again, the effects that inflation has actually had and impacted both the employee and employer market is something to call out. We know it's not just the employees struggling, but our employers are struggling as well. So now we know page growth in the last few years has probably been one of the most unpredictable due to the market demands. And again, I mentioned pay transparency and equity playing a role. But a lot of companies have also struggled to really keep up with the pay increases. And you can see the shift here. So let's talk about that real quick. On the left, you'll see a comparison on wage growth for job stayers and job seekers comparing 2023 to 2024. The job stayer and changer wages have actually slowly shifted downwards when you look at 2024, right? So we are starting to see things balance out a bit. But what does that really tell us? Wages that were adjusted to keep up with inflation have improved, which will hopefully put less strain on a company's bottom line, because we know a lot of companies are struggling to recover from that. But we do need to remember that the impact of inflation is still a struggle for everybody, right? Even though costs are decreasing, an average candidate or employee still may be trying to catch up from the impacts of inflation. And when we look at general market data, 81% of workers say their current wage has not kept up with the rise of cost of living. So companies should be thinking about how they can add that value, right, when it comes to compensating for that gap and the ongoing financial struggles. We know there's an opportunity because today, 80% of employees prefer additional benefits over a pay increase. So this is really where companies have that opportunity. And for those of you that have said salary, competing salary is one of the biggest challenges. That's where you have the ability to really elevate, again, that benefit strategy and take a look at that compensation package, which is completely key. And when we look at attracting and retaining talent, benefits is still front and center. 60% of employees right now have said that employee benefits were extremely important when they're considering to whether stay with their company or their current employer. And 60% have also reported that they strongly consider perks and benefits before accepting an offer. So again, when it comes to attracting and retaining talent, we know those benefits and perks are definitely still the front runner. And that's why when we look at compensating with pay and benefits and looking at the demands, we just have to make sure that a lot of those things are also personalized, right? Being able to understand what the employee market wants. So Suzanne, being our leader expert in the benefits world, we know that focusing on benefits matters, and shifts in across companies.
Yeah, Karen, you're spot on, and that's exactly right. I would say benefits not only assist with retention of your existing employees, but also the attraction of new employees. And the benefits don't stop there. What you're looking at here on the screen, these are some really powerful statistics, actually from a 2016 Gallup survey, but these same statistics still hold true and very, very relevant. So for those employers who are offering a benefits plan or offering to its employees, there's also benefits such as lower absenteeism, with 50% lower absenteeism. Your turnover rates are also 24% lower. I think I saw a message in the chat of like, oh gosh, like we get 2 weeks into training and, suddenly, they get one check and they're out of here. That could be an opportunity, right? Not knowing what your benefit plan is, but it could be an opportunity to dig in deep and understand, right? Do you have a benefits offering that is resonating with the, different demographic or generation of employee that you're hiring? And we're going to talk about that here in a couple of slides. So stay tuned for more there. There's also some additional statistics here in terms of 28% less shrinkage, fewer safety incidents. So that's really great as you think about your workers' compensation liability. And then, right, running your business, 17% greater productivity and 21% improved profitability when you're offering that comprehensive benefits portfolio.
So the interesting thing here, I want to just jump in for a second, is to provide some context. So when we look at these stats, they are going all the way back to 2016 to a Gallup State of the American Workforce. And the interesting thing, the past 4 years have really forced an evolution in HR departments to move away from a process and price tactical environment into a really strategic environment where we need to think about employee engagement. We need to think about the concept of motivating our employees to spend discretionary effort on our behalf. And when we do that, that's when we get these type of results. That's when we address problems where we have either quiet quitting, where people are still at the job but not actually working, or as we saw in the comment from one of the chats, someone starting and not making it through their actual training period before they terminate. It's all about changing that frame of reference to have a value proposition as an employer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are some great points, and I think engagement is the common theme when you're talking about just the experience of the employee. And again, even when you're looking at the engagement and how it connects to benefits in general, it continues to play a role, because again, it does go back to taking a look at the factors and really considering just the positive impact, right, that it's having on a person, and being able to pay attention to what it's doing to impact your people. So I love that. I know we talked about the effects of inflation also earlier, and again, the financial stress that goes beyond pay, and it comes in different forms, right? Being able to engage with your people and also understanding what is it that they're stressing about. Suzanne, I know ADP had an opportunity to get up close and personal, and make sure that all things really are on top of mind when someone is thinking about financial stress as a whole.
Yeah, Karen, you're absolutely right there. And this is a slide that really talks to me, because I think that left side of the slide really speaks to all of the pressures that each of us are facing, but also that are being faced by our employees. And to your point, every year my team, along with ADP's Market Insights team, go out and they survey our what we call worksite employees, or the employees of our clients. And we had over 53,000 respondents in our 2023 survey, and some really impressive findings. One statistic is 78% of employees feel valued when their employer offers them a benefits package or a benefits offering. I think some of the things that we probably need to pay really close attention to, right, is really what is the cost of that benefit? How much are these benefits costing? Because as you can see on that chart on the left-hand side, there are a lot of competing priorities in terms of where the employees are spending their dollars. In fact, the financial pressures of inflation and increasing rents and interest rates and things of that nature are putting pressure in terms of employees being able to actually afford the benefit offering that employers are offering them. So as you think about your ability to engage with your employees, I think that's definitely one of the things to consider is how much are you requiring your employees to contribute to their share of the benefits program? I know across the board, companies across the board have seen a reduction in employee participation. I think part of that is due to the cost shifting. As insurance prices go up, so do the insurance premiums, so do the share that employees are bearing for that package, that benefits package. And again, like, I just think it's a really unique time for employees. And the other thing that we know is many of them, in fact, 44% of employees don't feel like they have $500 available to pay for a medical emergency, right? So it's not that they don't need the coverage. I think they're trying to figure out how to prioritize their income and, invest in both the benefits as well as everything else that they might be responsible for. So again, could be an opportunity to just reevaluate your employee-employer contributions and the overall cost of the program.
Yeah, and I think the balance is important, right? And these are some great call outs on that ADP employee benefits survey. And just looking at this, I have to look at the bottom. I actually want to call out the last stat that we see: saving money for child's education and paying for child's education. I have to say, I feel like that one right there tends to be one of the biggest misses for companies when it comes to how they can alleviate that financial pressure of the workforce. Like, childcare right now has been one of the toughest industries. Not only is it becoming harder for owners to find childcare workers, but because of the talent struggles in the industry in itself, right? You're seeing less and less people that are saying, I want to work for a childcare facility. So you're seeing facilities shut down, which means there's less facilities out there for parents in general to be able to go to. And because of that, it's even more expensive for parents to actually put their children in childcare. And affordability is an issue, like you mentioned, right? I read somewhere that the government has said you should pay maybe 7% of your income for childcare costs, and right now they're running at 10 to 20%. So, we don't realize that this affects the labor market as well. It's that chain reaction, right? Predominantly, the female population stopped working after COVID to take care of their kids. And we've seen the female population actually get back to where they should be from a labor participation standpoint, which is great. But, in a recent ADP report, we saw that females are working less. And a lot of that could be due to childcare or elderly care even, right? So if we look at just parents in general and their struggles when trying to keep up with the costs now and increased costs on childcare, there's such a huge opportunity for employers to really see how they can alleviate that. And, this is a great view because we really are able to see employee sentiments when it comes to their needs and their struggles. And it's not something we may think about. You may not think about gas on a daily basis, right? So really being able to focus on the priorities is key. And I think it goes back to just making people feel valued, that their employees are invested in them at all levels, which really brings us to, again, going to the conversation around connecting with people both personally and professionally. We just saw so many different things right now that people are really stressing about. And it is crucial to how people do feel valued. Like, yes, 78% of employees feel valued because of the benefits that are offered, right, by their employer. But how can you really ensure that there is more of an elevated experience because you're taking various needs into consideration? So I want to pull up this visual here, which we call the work-life blueprint here at ADP. And some of you who actually joined our employee engagement webinar a few months ago may have seen this visual, but the loop is actually a great representation of the core needs that employees need at work. So again, looking at this work-life blueprint. And what it is that ADP conducted research with our ADP clients and employees to understand what it means to be human at work. And they conducted the research across all industries with employees in various stages in their professional careers. And if we're trying to simplify this here, employees today have 4 core needs at work: to be productive, to belong, to be inspired, and be uniquely valued. And each of these core needs are important to an employee at different times in their lives. So for our audience, right, think about your own career and life and what your needs were when you got your first job. Think about what your needs were when you wanted to say, all right, like, how do I continue to be successful in my career? What support did you need? And were there certain factors that either made you stay or leave? So again, work life looks very different than it used to, and it really is business and personal, as we call it. There's no beginning or end. It's an infinity loop. So these needs are ongoing, and it is important to be more human by acknowledging that everyone has different priorities. So, we have feeling productive. People want to feel like they're contributing to their work. How can you provide that? You have sense of belonging. People want to feel like they're belonging, right? There's a feeling of trust. To have those conversations on what matters to them, whether it's connecting to them or their families. Being inspired. We all desire to work for something greater than ourselves. So it's having the ability to acknowledge someone's passion, and then uniquely valued, right? Understanding that someone is an individual, and this takes us back to the personalization. Like, how do you think about that core need? And that's where companies should be thinking about the core areas and rethinking things like their benefit strategy and how it connects to their people. And when you look at ROI, right, and their people's needs, as a company, there's just so many ways that you can connect when you're trying to attract and retain talent. And people are going to feel more productive and engaged, right, because your people are having a positive experience. So just an interesting visual to take a look at. And this actually leads us perfectly into another kind of view. In order to assist our employees with overall balance and cater to the core needs, we need to understand that not all people in the workforce need the same things. The days of trying to figure out that perfect one-size-fits-all structure is really no longer working. And Suzanne, I know there's so much that you would say right now about just the various types of things that people really should be looking at when we're looking at various stages of people's lives.
Yeah, there are. And I alluded to it earlier, just in terms of the multi-generations that are represented in today's workforce. And I think important to note, every person is at a different stage in their life and in their career, and therefore the benefits that are important to them are also very different, right? So you can see on the slide here, we've articulated a few of the different generations and perhaps some of the events that are happening as part of their career journey. And then across the bottom are multiple examples of various different benefits programs that could fit into, you know, where a particular generation or employee is in their life cycle or in their career stage. I know there was a question in the chat earlier about pet insurance. Is pet insurance growing in popularity? The answer to that is yes, and not just pet insurance, but pet wellness. Again, that might not be critical for every one of the generations that are represented in the workforce, but definitely it is attractive to some. We are seeing a definite increase in participation and certainly interest in those products as well.
Right. And this is a great overview of the landscape, right? Really being able to take a look at the priorities. I wanted to focus in a little bit on financial wellness because, again, I feel like financial, just wellness in general, benefits are just becoming more and more standard. And, you know, when we take a look at financial planning, retirement savings and alleviating student debt are actually two very big topics. Suzanne and Greg, I know you're gonna comment on some of this stuff. I'd love to get your perspective, but from a recruiting perspective, one of the things that we are starting to see right now is that companies are actually offering retirement savings, things like 401k, more and more to a variety of their workforce. And what I mean by that is predominantly before, people that were high wage earners were eligible for 401k back in the day. And now with the competitive market and just the demands, you're starting to see companies take a look at all wage levels and say, we're going to just make this standard for anybody from low to high wage. So that's one thing that we've seen. And then student debt is another thing that we've seen. It's you see it here, 82% of U.S. employees say student debt is their top financial concern. It's real. People just can't get rid of it. And one thing that we've seen is it really is a big factor when people say, hey, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to alleviate my student debt. I just need to go to another company that's going to help me do that financially. So when we look at retirement savings and things like student debt, any thoughts on what we've seen from that specific priority that employees have today?
I can jump in specific to the retirement savings. And while 55% of Americans are concerned that they're not achieving financial security in retirement, I will share that there is an increase in confidence amongst employees about their ability, right? So 55% is definitely not where we want to be in terms of that comfort level, but the confidence overall is increasing amongst employees in terms of meeting their retirement and financial goals. I would say based on the surveys and the data that we've collected on our end, that comfortability is very closely tied with knowledge and education. We find when employees are educated about, the prospects of retirement, how much is needed in order to satisfy or have, financial comfort in the retirement period, they tend to take actions to increase their retirement savings. So that knowledge, communication is definitely front and center. I hate to, plug benefits again, but I know there was a comment in the chat about, gosh, like we're offering all of these benefit programs, but we're not seeing participation and utilization. I think one of the things that we have found, again, successful is just being really front and center, communicating, probably over communicating and letting people know what's available to them, educating them on why it's important, what's the downstream impact, and how can they really enroll in something that will protect their financial future. And Greg, I think student debt is also of key concern.
Yeah, when we think about our benefit packages, to that comment that we saw in the chat, medical, dental, and vision, right? We really need to think about opening the aperture when we think about our benefit solutions. So when it comes to financial planning, it's not just 401k, it's the ability for an employee to make direct payments onto their student loan debt. It's the ability of an employer to be more sophisticated and actually offer contributions to an employee's student debt. It's earned access to wages, early access to earned wages. It's about credit counseling. Really, financial planning is that larger aperture of how we manage financial wellness, not just when we hit a retirement age, but now as we go through our life as an employee, right? And that's the bigger picture that helps us engage those employees and retain the ones that we have.
Yeah, I think again, some great points there, right? When we take a look at wellness, and it does go back to people being able to give more knowledge around it, and the educational pieces and anything that they can do to contribute. And we're going to continue this conversation on wellness because again, there's so many factors to wellness, right? We talked a lot about the financial, and definitely going to get into mental, but I know that there's also a lot of other benefits right now that are still on top of mind for employees. Things like fertility and family planning, along with mental health and even spending accounts, right? To give people the freedom. They're becoming more relevant in this total compensation conversation as well.
Can I jump in, Karen?
Yeah, go ahead, Suzanne.
Awesome. So just as we've done an employee survey, we've also taken a survey of our clients, really trying to understand what is the mood on the street? What are you feeling? What are you hearing from your employees? And what benefits are most important? And I think this slide definitely nails it. What we hear from our clients is that next to medical, dental, and vision, family planning and fertility, as well as mental health, continue to be top of stat for things that they hear, both from applicants, prospective employees, as well as their existing employee base in terms of critical benefits in order to be competitive in the marketplace. That said, and you can see the stats on the screen, right? Almost 60% of employers are telling us that fertility coverage is critical to competing in today's labor market. Of those surveyed, 48% are planning to update the health benefits or the family planning benefits in their plan over the next 2 to 3 years. Very similar trajectory on your mental health side of the house. 36% of employers noting that access to mental health services is a top priority in 2024. And in 2023, we saw that 2/3 of employers were planning to enhance their EAP products. And those are things I would share with you all as we're evaluating different mental health providers and EAP solutions on the total source side of the house. We're definitely seeing that, you know, your standard EAP offerings where you're getting 1 or 2 counseling visits, you know, every single year, those are kind of a thing of the past, right? What folks are looking for right now are more in your face kind of mental health services where you're getting more than just 2 visits. And I think Kieran's mentioned this post-COVID environment earlier. I think that's certainly something that we see in a post-COVID environment as well, is just the need and the attention from a mental health perspective. But that's not the only thing. The chart on the bottom shows some of the other benefits that we hear our clients as well as employees of our clients articulating as things that are important to them. Things like fitness, mental health, which we talked about, home services, nutrition, and pet care, right? It all comes full circle. And one of the things that employers might consider to kind of cover off on this bucket, knowing that there's not a one size fits all for employee benefits. We talked about the generations and how everybody has a little bit of a different need. Employers might consider a fringe benefit type product. And there's lots of different platforms out in the marketplace where you contribute a flat fee and your employee goes and spends it on whatever fringe benefit is most important to them. We're certainly seeing that grow in popularity as well.
Yeah, it's always great to know that if there is a company out there that can offer something like life spending accounts, right? Again, it goes back to people have different needs. And if you just want to be able to say, hey, go spend it where you think it's best fit for you, could be a huge benefit for people. And, you know, I want to focus in again on mental health. because that is the other piece of wellness that you know I'd like to get into a little bit more detail around, because again, we are seeing that every year people are more and more stressed, right? And it seems the stress factor actually seems to be increasing every single year, and how people actually view mental health can mean a lot of different things. So before we get into some details, we're going to go with another poll question here. I'd love to hear from our audience, and just, you know, do you currently offer mental health perks to your employees? So just go ahead and submit yes or no. And again, you know, really being able to think about today what the employee market views as mental health is interesting, because Suzanne, you said it earlier, you have life spending accounts that can tackle anything from pet care to fitness, right? There's so much, and even things like family care, fertility, all of these things can impact someone's mental health, right? If they don't feel like they have the ability to tackle some of these challenges, that basically connects to their wellness. So just, you know, wanting to be able to understand what it does your workforce actually see as mental health is interesting, because people view it in many different ways. So let's see what our audience says right now about being able to offer mental health here. Maybe give it a couple more seconds to see. All right. Looks like we're still submitting here, so I don't want to cut people off while they're trying to answer. What do we think it's going to be? Do you think it's going to be maybe a little 50-50? More yes, more no? Suzanne, Greg?
I think it's going to be more yes. I'm going to go with more yes.
I'm going to be the negative Nancy. I'm going to go with more no's.
No,
negative Nancy, Greg.
All right. Well, it's the responses are actually still coming in, so I don't want to cut people off. I have to wait a little bit. Yeah. It looks like people are excited about this question here. So, okay. All right. We're probably waking a couple people up right now.
I mean, I don't want to slant the questions, but by the way, Kieran and Greg, there's a lot of mental health benefit in offering, even packaged in your medical plan. So you may be offering something and not be aware.
That's actually a very good call out. Very good call out there.
Now you're cheating.
All right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. Yes, 68%. All right. So it looks like Suzanne was the winner here. I was on both. So that's great. It's great to be able to see that people are currently offering mental health perks. But again, you know, when we take a look at certain companies that are really going out of their way to offer perks, they don't sometimes realize that there's so many other meanings to the perks, right, that equate back to mental health. So let's kind of go into what we're seeing today. And, you know, everyone in the workforce, they want a company that's invested in their well-being. And, you know, I would say mental health is wellness. And that feeling of burnout is still increasing every single year. We're seeing people stress. But, you know, we also saw U.S. workers study. There was a study that was done where 78% of workers don't actually think their employer is doing enough to address their mental wellness, which to me is concerning, right? Just because the emphasis around mental wellness has been so big, especially since COVID. I wouldn't expect 78% in 2024. You know, I would have, again, expected it 4 years ago. So what I think is, you know, there's obviously a huge disconnect that's taking place right now. And I don't think it's because companies aren't trying to offer it. We just saw almost, you know, 70% of our audience today says that they're offering mental perks, but do your employees actually think that you're offering mental perks based on what you're offering? And, you know, I think the definition of mental wellness sometimes doesn't really match the employees. We've noticed that. And this is probably where employers need to dig more. You know, I think sometimes people hear things like mental health and they think, oh, we offer therapy sessions, right? That people can go ahead and take advantage of. And sometimes it's more than that. It doesn't necessarily match what an employee would vision it as. And, you know, somebody may say, hey, like mental health is therapy. Mental health is family care. Mental health is gym perks or personal time off. So, I think the topic in itself is going to continue to be big, especially from our newer generations. The same percentage here, 78% of our Gen Z and millennial employees consider wellness plans a must-have. So, the topic is something that's going to continue just because the newer generations, it's not like only specific generations care about it. You're just seeing the newer generations voice it more, right? And really saying, hey, mental wellness is a big priority for us. So this is perfect because it actually takes us into really understanding the point of view from a generational perspective as well, because that's so important. And Greg, I know you have plenty to share about this moment, but before we get into that, I'd love to hear from the audience again. So we have another poll question as we get into the generational movement, just to be able to understand what majority generation currently makes up your workforce today. Curious to see what everyone says here. And we usually tend to get a little bit of a mix. Sometimes we speak to clients and their entire organization is all baby boomers. We have other companies right now that it's all, Gen Z. It's usually one or the other. I feel like we never hear the Gen X and the Gen Xers in the conversation. Or do you have a mix of all? So I would love to hear from our audience on this poll.
Kieran, as a Gen Xer, I know I'm the forgotten generation. I know no one notices me at all. I think it's really interesting, though, the conversation around mental health, right? Like when we think of the last 4 years, so much progress has been made in destigmatizing mental health and self-care. Like I was thinking in my head, the Treat Yourself Day, the idea of having a mental health day. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if my dad as a stockbroker on Wall Street had a mental health day where he just had to take off, they would have just fired him. And now the idea of a mental health day or a self-care day is something that we would expect as a perk when we think about our millennial or our Gen Z workforce.
Yeah. Some great call-outs. Well, with that said, let's see what our audience is saying right here. A mix of all. Okay, well that's good. Aside from the mix, though, it looks like the Gen Xers and the millennials are leading the way. So congrats, Greg. I know that you're happy to see the Gen X is still on top. I don't think that everybody's forgotten about them. But look at that, baby boomers. That's an interesting one, right? Obviously, we're seeing baby boomers leave the workforce, but I know we're going to have some more conversations around that. So let's get into the generational movement.
So it's actually really interesting, those poll results. The mix is expected, right? We were really expecting to see that. But the interesting change is that we're starting to see that inflection point where we have almost as many Gen Zs, new employees into the workforce, as we do have baby boomers aging out of the workforce. And over the next few years, we actually expect to see Gen Zs take over from a baby boomer perspective as they age out of the workforce. So as you can see here, the generations available, right? The common workforce. And the interesting thing is, like we said, Gen Zs will be overtaking baby boomers from a full-time workforce participation rate perspective as early as this year, probably next year for good. And we're looking at a peak 65 with almost 12,000 Americans that turn 65 every day in 2024. So there is a massive amount of talent that's going to be leaving the workforce every single day this year and into the future. And that really means we need to start addressing and thinking about how we look at our employee population and our employees more holistically. I was looking at the chat as everyone was talking, and there was a number of folks that had commented in the chats about 100% covered health, dental, and vision, employees under the age of 26 that are taking their parents' benefits, not opting into their benefit product. There were folks talking about how they are trying to engage their employees from a benefit perspective and balance the different generations that they have. So when we think about this, when we think as an employer on how we handle our workforce, it's really important to understand and provide context on what each generation looks for and it considers to be the most important. So if you look at your screen, I'm an annotator. I apologize in advance. I love annotating, and I know I shouldn't. A number of years ago, ADP did some research on what millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers like about work, what motivates them about work. And number one was compensation, followed by benefits. Then workplace flexibility came in third place. Career growth, obviously more important the younger you are. Employee recognition, critical when we think about millennials, less so for Gen Xers and baby boomers. The aspect of social responsibility, something that's really bubbled up over the last 4 or 5 years. And then hiring and onboarding experience. And if we had another poll in here, out of the 1,000+ people on this call, there's going to be folks that have applied on a paper copy and filled out an application. And there's going to be folks on this call that have never even thought about filling out a paper application from a recruitment perspective. So we had a good study and a good understanding of what those generations wanted. So over the last couple of years, my team has actually put together a meta-analysis. We looked at almost a dozen different surveys and research papers on Gen Zs, and then created a weighted average for those survey results on what Gen Zs cared about in the workplace, what was most important to them. And again, compensation, our actual pay for what we do when we go to work, is still number one. But there was a significant change in what we saw as number 2 and number 3. And that was a rise in workplace flexibility and career growth. So those younger employees that are entering the workforce or may have entered the workforce during the pandemic are used to the idea of remote work, of hybrid work, of workplace flexibility. And that becomes a key part of their benefit strategy, of what we need to do to engage them. And then obviously career growth becomes incredibly important when you're looking at 30 to 40 more years in the workforce. So that first job you have, that second or third job you have, is setting you up for success from an education and development perspective, and it makes career growth so important. And then to dial into benefits, right? To stay focused on the process and the conversation at hand. When we think about benefits from these workforces, the traditional benefits that baby boomers and Gen Xers were looking for around health and dental and vision has really expanded. There was a comment in the chat about pet insurance and how it differs from pet wellness. Those are benefits that a baby boomer or Gen Xer would maybe never opt for and consider really nothing important from a benefit offering perspective. But if you're a Gen Z and all you have is a Labradoodle and you haven't had a child yet, your fur baby is your baby, and pet insurance becomes incredibly important, and pet wellness becomes incredibly important. So the goal as an employer, when you look at your benefit strategy, it's not to say to myself, well, I need to offer something for a baby boomer, and then I also need to offer something for a Gen X. It's about designing a holistic structure of benefits beyond the base 7 or 8 that we think of, right? Health, dental, vision, life, long-term disability, and short-term disability, 401k. It's about expanding that aperture, increasing what you focus on, and then allowing the optionality for employees to pick and choose the right solution for themselves. So at the end of the day, Suzanne was talking about medical tourism, reproductive benefits, right? All of these benefits are great, but they don't need to be great for every employee. They can engage a portion of the employees, and each one of those employees that engages with a product you offer, that's a hook that helps you retain that employee. Because now when they look at competitive job offer, they have to think, well, do they have fertility treatment? Do they have a spending account? Do they have the workplace flexibility components that are in there? And that actually brings me to workplace flexibility, right? And it's not just about working from home. It's not just about a hybrid workforce. We have to think about how that's been reshaped through the Ubers and DoorDashes and Instacarts of the world, right? Workplace flexibility has to be inclusive of the idea of job sharing, of the gig economy, of flexibility in where and when you work. This really has changed the narrative on how we think about ourselves as employers to ultimately deliver a better experience for our employees. Now, Suzanne, I know you had something you wanted to talk about when it came to workplace flexibility.
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for giving me the opportunity to pipe in. I think workplace flexibility is super important, not just in terms of being able to work virtual or in the office, but as I think about workplace flexibility, it's also time away from work, right? And ensuring that you have a comprehensive benefit program for your employees when the unexpected happens. Perhaps they need to go out on a leave of absence, right? We call that time away. And so thinking about, are we offering a short-term disability product or, paid parental leave? And God forbid the time away or the leave of absence extends beyond that short-term window. Are we offering a long-term disability plan, right? How are we ensuring and protecting that financial interest of our employees? So that's a caveat I would call out for all to think about.
It's interesting because this question keeps popping up. It's actually the second time I've seen this in the chat, is how do I create a custom benefit strategy, right? A benefit design to reach certain demographics in a thoughtful way, but also maintain compliance. And again, that's going to be about understanding that benefits are more than just the healthcare component, and making sure that you have a rich benefit solution that covers all of the optionality that an employee would want. Things like an EAP, things like mental health. They're actually software as a service product providers that offer telehealth through a phone with no copay. And it's an easy way to engage with healthcare without using a traditional healthcare product. Again, there are options out here from a design standpoint. And the important thing as an operator, as an administrator from an HR standpoint, it's not to think about what would I like. It's about, would someone in my workforce find that engaging? Would that generate engagement or attachment to that employee? That's really how we design it. And from a medical perspective, it's about understanding the products that we offer and the plan designs behind those products to engage different workforces, right? To get into the nitty-gritty around healthcare. And then the last super important component when we think about Gen Zs and that changing workforce is career growth. And this is something where after we've hired an employee and we found out they're a good employee, we've trained them up a little bit, we've developed them, and they're good at a job, we as managers and leaders have to recognize that that can't be the end of that employee's journey. Because if we say that employee became good at something and that's where I want them to sit, I can guarantee you your employee is going to turn over within 2 to 4 years because they're looking for more challenges and more activity to grow themselves as an employee. And that's where career growth needs to be so critically important, even if it means sacrificing an incredible individual contributor for the sake of the large organization and that employee's health and wellness. So when we think about benefits, when we think about that loop, we really have to understand that that engagement loop that we saw a few slides ago, right? And we look at these list of categories. This is all about really designing an experience for our employees. I call it the employee value proposition, right? It is ultimately why someone chooses to onboard at your company, and then why they decide to persist at your company, showing up every day and actually doing the work. And that's the value proposition. And the amazing thing is when you look at this stack, and I'm going to annotate again because I apologize, right? Compensation is pay. It's expensive. It's the most expensive way you have to engage your employees. Benefits, traditionally 30% of the base pay. That's what benefits cost, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's your second most expensive way to engage your employees. But if you expand that benefit conversation and think about your value proposition, workplace flexibility, career growth, recognition, the social responsibility aspects of your business, those are ways you can drive a benefit to work without necessarily driving up the labor burden associated with deploying benefits to an employee. So we want to make sure that we frame this largely around the value proposition that you have. I'm going to turn it back over to Kieran.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And I love that we actually talked about work flexibility and career growth, because those are actually additional factors when it comes to total compensation, right? And it's really taking it to that next level. And I'm not going to get too much into the flexibility piece because you talked a lot about it. And Suzanne, you brought in some really good points around what people should really view as flexibility. But I really want to talk about the career growth piece so much, because we are starting to see, the way that people think about things like education and skills. It's such a big piece right now, just in regards to the workforce. And right now, you see a stat: less than 50% of workers think their employer invests in the skills they need to advance. And being able to go back to, feeling inspired and feeling productive and feeling like you can grow. It's such a big piece to someone's movement. And when we look at experience today and how it's deteriorating in a lot of industries, and how people are viewing education, you're not seeing people today that are getting your typical four-year degree, right? They're saying, hey, I'd rather go to vocational school or get certifications or get skilled so I can make sure that I'm joining a company that makes sense for me. And I think what companies have to think about today when it comes to career growth is don't expect someone to necessarily go out there and get the skills, but be the organization that says, hey, I'm going to offer the skills to you. I'm going to pay for you to get these skills. I'm going to make sure that I'm invested in your future growth at the same time. So I wanted to just call out that piece on career growth. And you gave so many, just a lot of great examples around that generational movement. And I kind of wanted everyone to see that visual again, right? That Suzanne talked about earlier when we're looking at just the different stages that we really have to pay attention to, and what people are wanting based on the different stages of their lives. And again, it's taking a look at all the factors. And I know when we look at this slide, it's a little overwhelming, right? Like so many people want so many different things. How do you actually balance it? And I do think this actually paints a great picture, because again, it's going back to looking at what events are taking place in different people's lives. But, we talked a lot about Gen Z, and I want to say, let's not forget about the baby boomers, because there is a lot of conversations around the newer generations that are going to make up the workforce, but we really can't forget about the baby boomers either. I heard where there's 20% of baby boomers are going to extend working or consider coming back from retirement. And that could be key for a lot of companies today, because we need the companies to think about those baby boomers that are going to be in the workforce that can actually be a part of their succession planning, right? You need people today that are going to help mentor and make sure that that experience is actually moving forward into the newer generation. So, let's not forget about that generation, because there's still perks and there's still things that you can offer that will say that a baby boomer just may say, hey, I may want to stick around a little longer. But again, it's going back to just the various areas of the generational workforce, and really being able to understand, hey, like, what is it that my people want? So I think when we take a look at engagement, right, we've had a lot of conversations around that, and really thinking about what people consider as total compensation. The question that we would have for our audience is, do you know what generations make up your workforce? And it seems like a good portion of you do, but if not, how do you know what actually drives them? Where are you gaining your feedback from today? So you can't just make an assumption on engagement without knowing what your people are giving as far as feedback goes today in the workforce. So we're going to have one more last poll question here for our audience, and would love to just ask our audience today, do you currently utilize any engagement tools to gain employee feedback? So let's go ahead and
Good.
And
no, that's okay. I'm just listening. Hang on, let me mute this. I'm listening to the end of the webinar. Hang on, let me mute this. How you doing?
I think we got to get muted here on our end.
So it's funny, Kieran, that you should bring up that slide that showed those generations. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is that someone put in the chat, don't put baby boomers or Gen Xers in a box. Ultimately,
that's odd. I was supposed to meet with him tomorrow. Okay.
Julie, I think you're on. You're not on mute. I apologize. I think you're not on mute.
Got it. Okay.
As I was saying, it's almost a tee up, right? You have to be able to not just recognize that you have a demographic differential in your workforce. You have to survey. You have to ask questions. You have to understand what folks are looking for to gauge whether what you're doing is successful or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So majority of our audience right now is saying yes, they do currently utilize engagement tools to gain employee feedback. And I think that's one thing that we tend to see companies don't do today. It's really being able to connect with your workforce by giving your people a voice. And you see here, 81% of employees actually wish that their company conducted employee engagement surveys more frequently. And here at ADP, we actually do have something that's called the Voice of the Employee. That's an engagement tool that allows companies to really gain feedback throughout the various stages of someone's career, right? Everything from the new employee experience to your health and wellness, well-being offering, just the process, culture. There's so much that you can really gain when it comes to gaining that feedback. And we've heard a lot of greats in the last 2 years, right? The great resignation, the great retention, the great retirement, the great reshuffle. There's something actually that's called the great disconnect. And that's something that we're hearing a lot now too. And it's just because people are calling out, my employer is completely disconnected from my needs. So think about those opportunities to have those engagement tools, because you can actually connect it back to total compensation. If we're really thinking about this topic and everything that we've talked about today, it's making smarter decisions on your offerings, right? By having these tools, you're not only just understanding what your employees are feeling about their work, but it allows you to actually take action. It allows you to tell your people, we heard your voice and we're going to take your feedback and we're going to see what we can do about it. And even give timelines, right? If we can't do something with it now, we're going to get back to you in the future. And again, it's just creating that sentiment that you're showing your people that you're listening. It allows you to strengthen your culture and again, improve those business outcomes. So again, just being able to think about those benefits and what they can bring to the table, especially as you're listening to the voice of your employees today. So, as we close out, I just want to bring this visual up again in regards to the infinity loop. And when we think about everything that we've talked about today, which was some really great conversation, thank you, Greg and Suzanne. Again, thinking about total compensation and being competitive in this market and what it really means for your workforce. Just think about the needs we discussed that really create that human connection to the workforce, right? Evaluating your total comp strategy as you look at all trends like work-life balance, affordability, inclusivity and well-being, and financial health. So again, look at all these things that are affecting your current workforce just in the various stages of their lives, and also understanding how you can meet your people where they are, right? How do you provide to make sure, again, your people are feeling productive, have a sense of belonging, feel inspired, and also uniquely valued. So again, thank you to our audience. This brings us to the end of our webinar, and we hope you found this conversation insightful. And again, Greg and Suzanne, thanks so much to the Powerhouse for bringing your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.